In the dark glow of candlelight, a man bends over a map. The edges burned, the parchment creased, his eyes fixed westward, not to the familiar coasts of Europe or Africa, but to the vast unknown. He whispers, "There lies the Indies." That man was Christopher Columbus, a sailor whose dream would redraw the map of the world and forever change the fate of millions. It was the 15th century, an age of faith, fear, and ambition. Europe was emerging from the shadows of the Middle Ages. Nations were rising, trade routes expanding, and gold, the heartbeat of empire, called to men across oceans. In this world stood Columbus, not born of nobility, not a man of great fortune, but of unshakable belief. He wasn't merely chasing riches. He was chasing a vision, a shortcut across the Atlantic to the riches of Asia. But his dream came with risk. For centuries, sailors feared the Sea of Darkness, a place where monsters were said to swallow ships whole. Columbus dared to cross it. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451 in the bustling port city of Genoa in modern-day Italy. His father, Domenico, was a humble wool weaver. His mother, Susanna, kept the family steady through hardship. Young Columbus grew up surrounded by the scent of salt air and the sound of traders' voices shouting in dozens of tongues. Genoa was a crossroads of commerce, of maps, of dreams. It was here that Columbus first heard stories of distant lands, Cathay, China, Cipangu, Japan, and the fabled Spice Islands. From an early age, he learned the art of navigation. He studied Ptolemy's maps, the writings of Marco Polo, and the stories of Arab sailors who had ventured farther than any European. Yet, unlike most, he dared to think differently. He believed fiercely that the world was smaller than it was. He thought that sailing west from Europe could lead directly to Asia. But the learned men of his time laughed. The scholars said his distances were wrong, catastrophically wrong. If he set sail west, they warned, he would die long before reaching land. Still, he dreamed. In his 20s, Columbus sailed to the edges of the known world, to the coasts of Portugal, Iceland, and West Africa. He survived pirate attacks, storms, and shipwrecks. Each journey hardened him. Each failure deepened his resolve. By the 1480s, the world was changing fast. Portugal had rounded Africa's Cape of Good Hope, unlocking the route to India. Spain, newly united under King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, hungered for glory to rival their Portuguese neighbors. Columbus saw his chance. He proposed his daring plan to the Portuguese king to reach Asia by sailing west. But the scholars of Lisbon dismissed him. Madness, they said. His math is wrong. The sea is endless, rejected but unbroken. Columbus turned to Spain. For years, he lingered in royal courts, pleading his case. The Spanish monarchs were cautious, their treasury drained by wars against the Moors. But when Granada, the last Muslim stronghold, fell in 1492, their eyes turned toward new conquests. Columbus's persistence finally paid off. With the support of influential courtiers and the promise of vast riches, Isabella agreed to fund his voyage. He was given 3 ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And with them, he carried a royal commission to sail into the unknown. On August 3, 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail from Palos de la Frontera. Behind him, the world he knew. Ahead, the edge of imagination. The 3 ships, Niña, Pinta, and Santa Maria, left the Spanish coast in August 1492, their sails swelling with the Atlantic wind. For the first few days, the crew stayed close to land, comforted by the faint outline of Spain behind them. But soon the familiar shores vanished, replaced by endless water and sky. Columbus had entered what sailors called the Sea of Darkness. No maps, no landmarks, only faith. The men aboard were ordinary sailors, not explorers. Most had never been this far from land. As days passed, fear crept among them. They whispered of sea monsters and bottomless pits that swallowed ships whole. The horizon offered no comfort, just more water. Columbus, however, remained calm. He studied the wind, the stars, and the flight of birds. Each sunrise renewed his conviction that land must be near. He wrote in his journal, "I trust in God, and I shall find new lands." To keep morale high, he often lied about the distance they traveled, reporting fewer miles than they actually sailed. It was a clever trick, easing the fear that they were too far gone to return. As the weeks passed, signs began to appear: floating branches, pieces of wood, and flocks of birds heading west. The men prayed these were messages from land unseen. By early October, discontent reached a breaking point. The sailors muttered about mutiny. "Turn back," they demanded. "There is no land beyond the sea." But Columbus stood firm. He promised them that if land was not found within a few days, he would return. Then on the night of October 11th, 1492, everything changed. A sailor aboard the Pinta, Rodrigo de Triana, shouted into the darkness, "Tierra! Tierra! Land! Land!" At dawn, the crew saw it, a stretch of green rising from the blue horizon. Tears filled their eyes. Prayers filled the air. They had crossed the Atlantic. The next morning, October 12th, 1492, Columbus stepped ashore on a small island in the Bahamas. He carried the banner of Spain and declared the land for Ferdinand and Isabella. He named it San Salvador, Holy Savior. The local people, later known as the Taíno, watched curiously from the trees. They had never seen men like these before, clad in metal and carrying crosses. To Columbus, this was the edge of Asia, the gateway to India. He called the people Indios, believing he had reached the Indies. But in truth, he had reached a new world unknown to Europe, yet home to millions. He and his crew explored nearby islands, Cuba and Hispaniola, today's Haiti and the Dominican Republic. He marveled at the beauty of the land, the lush forests, golden beaches, and the generosity of the native people. Columbus wrote that the Taíno were peaceful and kind, offering food and gifts freely. Yet beneath his admiration grew another thought: these people could be converted to Christianity and serve the Spanish crown. When the Santa Maria was wrecked on Christmas Day, Columbus built a small fort from its remains, La Navidad, the first European settlement in the Americas. Leaving some men behind, he returned to Spain in early 1493, bringing with him parrots, gold trinkets, and several Taíno captives. As his ships approached Spanish shores, church bells rang and crowds gathered. Columbus was hailed as a hero, the man who found the new route to the Indies. But he had not reached Asia. He had stumbled upon an entire continent unknown to his world. The voyage had changed history forever. When Columbus returned to Spain in 1493, the world saw him as a hero, the man who had opened the gates to the riches of the Indies. The Spanish court celebrated him with honors, titles, and promises. He was named Admiral of the Ocean Sea and granted governorship over all lands he might discover. To Europe, it was the dawn of a golden age. To Columbus, it was just the beginning. Within months, he prepared for a second voyage far larger and grander. This time, 17 ships and more than 1,000 men followed him across the Atlantic. Not merely explorers, they were settlers, priests, and soldiers, bringing with them seeds, animals, and weapons. But the dream of paradise would soon turn dark. When Columbus reached Hispaniola, he found tragedy. Fort La Navidad, the small settlement he had left behind, was gone, burned to ashes. The men he had stationed there were dead, killed after mistreating the local Taíno people. It was the first sign of the collision between two worlds, one of conquest, one of peace. Columbus was shocked, yet determined. He built a new settlement, La Isabela, the first permanent European town in the Americas. But life there was harsh. Food was scarce, disease spread, and the settlers grew restless. His leadership, once inspired, began to falter. The men demanded gold, the promise that had brought them here. Columbus pushed the natives to find it, forcing them to work in the rivers and mines. Resistance followed, and soon blood was shed. The Taíno people, once welcoming, now saw their new visitors as invaders. By his third voyage in 1498, Columbus's glory had dimmed. The Spanish crown, once generous, now doubted his rule. Rumors of tyranny reached Spain, stories of harsh punishments, rebellions, and chaos. That same year, Columbus made his first sighting of the South American mainland, near present-day Venezuela. For a brief moment, he believed he had finally reached the edge of Asia, but his heart was heavy. The paradise he imagined had turned to turmoil. When he returned to Hispaniola, rebellion awaited him. Settlers accused him and his brothers of cruelty and mismanagement. The Spanish crown could no longer ignore it. In 1500, a royal commissioner arrived, and Columbus, once celebrated as a hero, was arrested. His hands were bound in chains, He was sent back to Spain in disgrace. The same people who had once cheered his name now whispered of failure. But Queen Isabella, moved by his suffering, pardoned him. Though stripped of his titles, Columbus was allowed one final voyage. In 1502, he set sail again, now an old and weary man. He explored the coasts of Central America, from Honduras to Panama, still searching for a passage to Asia. Storms battered his ships, disease ravaged his men. He was stranded for months in Jamaica, begging passing ships for rescue. At last he returned to Spain broken, sick, and forgotten. In 1506, Christopher Columbus died in Valladolid. Few noticed his passing. He still believed he had reached Asia, never knowing he had unveiled an entirely new world. His dream outlived him. His name would echo through the centuries as both the discoverer who connected continents and the man whose voyage began an age of conquest, change, and tragedy. Christopher Columbus may have died believing he had reached Asia. Yet his voyages had opened the door to an entirely new world. His discoveries triggered a chain reaction that reshaped continents, cultures, and economies forever. Within decades, European powers, Spain, Portugal, England, and France crossed oceans, claiming lands, establishing colonies, and trading resources. Columbus's journey marked the beginning of the age of exploration, connecting Europe, Africa, and the Americas in ways never imagined. The Columbian Exchange began a vast transfer of plants, animals, technologies, and ideas. Corn, potatoes, and tomatoes traveled to Europe, while horses, wheat, and cattle moved to the Americas. Yet with these gifts came diseases, especially smallpox, which devastated native populations who had no immunity. Columbus's arrival also sparked a darker legacy. The Taíno and other indigenous peoples faced forced labor, violence, and the erosion of their cultures. European conquest created a New World economy built on colonization, slavery, and exploitation. Despite these tragedies, Columbus became a symbol of courage and ambition. Statues, maps, and schools bore his name. Historians praised him as the navigator who dared to challenge the known limits of the world. Yet modern perspectives are more complex. Columbus's legacy is debated, he is celebrated as a fearless explorer and criticized as the initiator of centuries of colonization and oppression. His voyages also changed the very concept of the world. The Earth was no longer an abstract map. It was a connected globe of lands, seas, and peoples. Trade routes shifted, knowledge of geography expanded, and the imagination of Europe was forever altered. In Spain, Columbus's discoveries fueled wealth and power, helping the nation become a global empire. Across the Atlantic, the Americas experienced transformation. New crops, technologies, and religions intermingled with native traditions, creating the beginnings of modern civilizations. Columbus's story continues to inspire adventurers and dreamers. His life reminds us that ambition and curiosity can push humanity into unknown territories, sometimes with glory, sometimes with consequences. Even today, we study his journals, maps, and letters to understand not just the voyages, but the mindset of an era that believed in discovery, conquest, and destiny. Christopher Columbus remains a figure of paradox, a man who connected worlds, yet also brought suffering. His legacy is a mirror of human ambition, courage, and complexity. And so, every journey into the unknown, every bold step beyond familiar horizons, carries the echoes of his voyages, a reminder that the world we know today was shaped by those who dared to sail west.